Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us at this session of the Research America National Health Research Forum, Strengthening the STEM Workforce for a Competitive Future. I'm Keith Yamamoto. I have the honor of moderating this panel discussion. We're, of course, disappointed that Director Panchanathan is unavailable today to serve on the panel, but we're really grateful to him for his recorded message, which really elegantly frames both the challenges and the opportunities in supporting and building the STEM workforce and all the really innovative activities going on within his National Science Foundation. So let me begin by introducing the panelists who are with us today. Dr. Cortez Bowlin is the Lewis Sullivan Science Policy Fellow at Research America. Dr. Elena Fuentes-Afflick recently abandoned me as a UCSF colleague and is now Chief Scientific Officer of the Association of American Medical Colleges. Dr. Darío Gil is Senior Vice President and Director of Research at IBM and Chair of the National Science Board. Okay, so strengthening the STEM workforce for a competitive future, big challenge. Let me start with some questions that explore the scope, the potential of multi-sector, multi-level roles, involvements, responsibilities even in this challenge of strengthening the STEM workforce. Darío, let me start with you. In 1945, as you well know, Vannevar Bush basically set the framework for federal science and technology policy in this country, which encompassed education as well. And he said that the federal government should support basic research, but really also the training of the next generation of scientists and engineers. His focus was on upper level education, graduate, postdoc, residents, and so forth. A little bit less in the undergraduate and very little in K through 12. But STEM education and training is not only the role of the federal government. The private sector is also deeply involved. Your leadership at IBM and in the National Science Board involves you firsthand in both sectors. So how do you see the roles and actions of the federal government and the private sector in promoting the STEM workforce?
Yeah, well, first of all, Keith, thank you, and thank you for Research America for organizing this panel. You know, as you correctly pointed out, the responsibilities are highly distributed, right, in education and workforce development around that. And what we should recognize is that, you know, from a government perspective, what we know is, you know, local, state, and federal government set of responsibilities that often we struggle with some of that element of coordination. Going back, Keith, you know, you're going back to, you know, the creation in 1945 and 1950, but I'll remind that also in 1958, we saw the National Defense Education Act that made very significant investments on this question, on the talent, or who gets to access education in science and technology. And we saw the first federal loan programs, right, that would happen as part of that to broaden access and participation. We saw also matching grants that went to community colleges, right, et cetera. Now, always as a companion to this story has been the investments that businesses also have to make in the private sector for their workforce. So there's both a dependency on the talent supply that is coming out from this educational system, but then our continuous investments that we make on our own employees. And this is more important than ever because we know that the length of time in which the skills that you have acquired become obsolete is getting more and more compressed. So we have to spend an enormous amount of time on the continuous education, which we do sometimes with our own curriculum and our own training programs, and also in partnership with the college ecosystem and partnerships around this. And to us, it's a vital and indispensable element of our competitive advantage on this. So I think one of the things I hope we get to explore around that is how do we stack these dollar investments, or what is the fluidity in which through someone's career we have the opportunity to engage with our communities in practice, and how we're able to go in and out of formal and informal education as we go through our careers. But I mean, I think the flagship element of it is that we have distributed responsibilities. It's not just the story of a single entity being accountable and responsible for the educational system in our country and for the career opportunities that we all deserve.
Great. Well, let me build on that with a question for Cortez. So Cortez, you work for Research America. Everyone knows it's a large consortium of private sector, mostly nonprofit, but also for-profit organizations, of academic organizations. And as such, Research America has got a broad reach across the sectors that Darío was talking about. So has Research America itself established STEM development programs? Have they promoted those as a priority across this broad spectrum of membership of Research America? And how can you be ensuring that a broad targeted population can access those kinds of programs?
Well, good afternoon. Thanks for the question, Keith, and thank you for leading this panel. It's already turning out to be a fantastic round of discussion, and I'm looking forward to where we go with this. To sort of talk for a brief moment on Research America and what Research America is doing in terms of trying to increase both the diversity of workforce education and the different number of programs that Research America has established for STEM development. I want to talk about our STAC committee, or our Science and Technology Action Committee. So as part of Research America's attempt to advocate more effectively and successfully, the Science, Technology, and Action Committee was established. And STAC has a strategic plan, which, and I'm just going to pull a quote from it because I really like this quote, advocates for a larger investment just in general relative to GDP into our nation's research system. And the quote that I like from this is, STEM education programs in the Department of Education should gain substantial resources to develop and underwrite programs that convey the excitement of science and maximize this nation's remarkable intellectual resources among students and trainees at every level. And the reason that I like that is because it hits three highlights that I feel like are essential for accomplishing the mission of increasing engagement in STEM education. The first is we need to convey the excitement of science. Science isn't just some boring, stuffy person sitting in a lab staring at a test tube until it changes colors. Science is everything around you. Science is the flowers budding, the butterflies flying, it's the cars flying by you on the street. We need to emphasize that. And then the second of the three parts is maximize this nation's remarkable intellectual resources. And that is, it just speaks to me as someone who grew up under the idea that you can be what you put your mind to. And we have so many students in this country from K through 12 all the way up to graduate level who, when given the opportunity, can thrive in a STEM-based educational program. And that brings me to the third part, which is students and trainees at every level. The federal government in general acts as sort of the minimum bare acceptable level. The federal government sets what is considered the passing grade, if you will, for STEM education programs. But it's up to organizations outside of the federal government, nonprofit organizations, industry, universities, community colleges, to build off of what is the bare passing grade and make it so that most of the people have an opportunity to excel rather than just get through high school science courses with a C. So Research America, through the STAC work, has really worked to advocate for that by bringing industry partner members, nonprofit partner members, universities, and just all members of our alliance together to bring a unified voice to these kind of ideas. On a more direct level, me personally, as the Lewis Sullivan Policy Fellow, I am working on building some connection between community college organizations, because it is my personal belief, and the data is there to back me up on this, that the community college level actually represents a solid link in the chain that is needed to improve participation for non-traditional students. For example, students who did not just graduate from high school, students who have caretaker responsibilities, students who cannot access the university level educational courses because of time or financial constraints. So on my personal point of interest, I'm working towards building a communication network between community college organizations to spread information about opportunities that are becoming available through the National Science Foundation, the National Institutes of Health, and other federal level, state level, and industrial level events. We also have things like our microgrants program, which this year's microgrants program selected 5 proposals for the underrepresented minorities looking to engage in local communities. And I think that's kind of how we plug into the direct action. So I know I rambled a little bit, but I hope that answered something.
It does. Thanks a lot. That's an outstanding set of activities. Elena, let me move to you. You represent your chief scientific officer for another large organization. This one, the AAMC. This one, a kind of upper level academic organization representing a large number of medical institutions around, medical academic institutions around the country. And so talk a little bit about, kind of building on what Cortez has been talking about, how upper level academic organizations can or should support STEM efforts at lower levels. Cortez talked a lot about community colleges, for example. So should these upper level academic institutions be involved in this way? And if so, how?
Thank you, Keith, for the invitation. Thank you to Research America as well. The AAMC is a strong supporter of these types of initiatives because we recognize that although we represent schools of medicine and medical institutions, that is late in the process to bring more people into our profession. So one of our challenges, though, is that we don't represent the K through 12 educational spectrum. But we have generally focused on people who are already in college or on a pre-med track. And we recognize that we need to focus more on the K through 12 part of the pathway to a health and physician workforce. So the AAMC has a record of supporting various educational initiatives, pathway programs that will increase interest and exposure in careers in science. And we support our members as they develop their own programs and educational adaptations. One of the AAMC's core strategic planning pillars is to increase the diversity and pathways to careers. And this is it's called the Diversify Tomorrow's Doctors program, where we have internal and external collaborations to make the pathway to our professions more accessible, equitable, and attainable. And we have a number of steps that focus specifically on the K through 12 education process, which we're very excited about.
Terrific. So I think what we've all heard, if you bring together what we heard from Punch with the comments from our panelists, is that there are broad opportunities and really responsibilities in working at all levels to strengthen STEM education, STEM training, to really move toward a workforce that is well prepared and robust. So this really in turn raises another challenge that I'd like the panelists to comment on. How do we scale up that workforce, not just increasing its size, but enabling it to contribute at all levels, all the job descriptions and career options, to assure that our competitiveness really stays at the peak where it now resides. We heard Ponch, for example, point out that the STEM workforce needs more than just academic scientists to try to move forward. So Elena, let me come back to you again. How do we align the specific skills and competencies that are most in demand in today's STEM workforce and tomorrow's STEM workforce, and with training and education programs that will allow us to build that workforce across that broad spectrum of competencies that are needed?
Thank you. We believe that it is essential to equip our workforce, particularly our educators, so that they can update the education and training programs as the fields of science and technology evolve. We think right now about AI and its impact, including its disruptive impact. So that's one example of how educators need to be prepared and nimble. So we believe it's important that educators have flexibility in the way that they approach these training and learning issues, but not through micromanagement. So we want policies that allow educators to apply their expertise in the most effective way so that they can then educate that future workforce. There may be gaps, and we want to work with our institutions to address those gaps. And if I can take a moment to highlight the elements of our strategic plan that address both the K-12 pathway as well as other gaps, we've created virtual communities for pathway programs so that people can learn from each other and thereby accelerate their own progress. We have needs assessment based on learners' experiences, educators' experiences, and the support systems that are needed to promote this ideal. And we will be piloting resources and products to meet learners at different points along the pathway, hoping to create that robust workforce of the future.
Terrific, really optimistic and encouraging. Let me pass the baton here to Cortez. One of the challenges in reaching the scale that we need for today's and tomorrow's STEM workforce is that we're not including all Americans in the equation. And the demographics of the STEM workforce has long failed to be representative of the overall demographics in the US. And we're talking not race, obviously, but gender, socioeconomic status, geography, and more. Geography is something that again, Ponch mentioned in the regional centers that are being developed. So what are the most effective strategies in your view for engaging students from underrepresented groups across that spectrum of demographics in STEM at an early age that will keep them engaged and keep them moving toward being productive members of the workforce?
Thank you for this question. It's something that I really enjoy thinking about because I have a niece and nephew at home that I like to spoil with science toys. And the way that I have found to get them excited about science in general is to show them that even the things I think are silly are scientific in a way. And I think that's going back to the STAC mission. I think that is the important part, showing the excitement of science. So as a way of addressing that question, I think the most effective strategies are the ones that work for pretty much everything that we ever want kids to get involved in. Get them excited. Once you build that excitement, the excitement tends to last. It tends to drive. Now, there are a lot of groups that are underrepresented for financial reasons or for accessible reasons. I come from a small rural area in Mississippi. Our science programs were nothing to write home about. We need to do better on that. But I think the easiest way to do that is to build the ground level movement. Get kids, parents involved at an early age so that school systems will have incentive to increase STEM activities and STEM education. Ultimately, the demographics of this country are changing. I saw a fascinating poll earlier that showed that there were about, I think, 7 more women to men in this country, and yet that does not reflect in our STEM workforce. I think that when we ask the question of how do we get underrepresented groups involved in STEM work, we really need to be asking the question, why aren't they involved in STEM work? And it boils down to excitement, accessibility, and generally the means to participate. So work on those.
So that's great, and really what you talked about, and Elena did too, was really action at the front end of being able to engage all of these groups in an early stage, generating excitement, as you talked about. But let me be kind of direct about framing the other end and see what your thoughts are. So in 2011, Donna Ginther published a very important paper showing that Black Americans are systematically underfunded relative to whites in NIH grants. Yes, there's been some improvement over the ensuing 13 years, but it's clearly very slow. In fact, to eliminate that at the current rate, it's going to take at least another 30 years. That's kind of not okay. So the question is, what's it going to take to finally address these systemic factors that are leading to these kinds of disparities? So really, what are your thoughts about the other end of the process, that once we are able to engage these underrepresented groups in science and STEM careers, how do we make sure that biases don't creep in that make it disadvantageous for them to keep working? Are there approaches that you can imagine that can take on that challenge?
Yes, but I feel like I'm going to have a lot of PIs from research institutions coming after me on this. I just finished my PhD, and going through the process was very time-consuming and exhaustive. And one thing that I noticed is that in terms of viability as a job, being a graduate student is not very high on the list, especially when you consider it proportional to the amount of work you do for the research institution that you work at. Now, some students have the option of relying on family as sort of a means to help them float through the years that they're in graduate school. Some students don't have that option, and unfortunately, a lot of students who are in that situation are from underrepresented populations. For example, if your graduate student stipend is only $23,000 a year, that is in general below the amount you would need to live in many school cities. So if your question is, do I go for a PhD or a master's degree, or do I start immediately in the workforce and just not pursue any further STEM work? Depending on your ability, the answer's already been made for you. So I think that the easiest answer to that question is support. Support for the students who have put in the time to make their way to these positions. Because ultimately, research is not going to be done unless students are constantly pushing the system forward and mentors are constantly teaching new students. And if we cannot support that system with living wages, then the system will not last. It will collapse, or it will become a more demographically united population. So pay graduate students more.
Okay, so one answer to my question really then is this level of support for these individuals, but one kind of support that also addresses that could begin to take on the disparity that Ginther's study uncovered is really equitable, fair and equitable support at the level of funding of research grant applications. And so that's another piece of the puzzle that we need to at least acknowledge and really begin to take on. That's great. Darío, let me return to you. You have a very important position in heading the National Science Board, which annually publishes U.S. and global science and engineering indicators. And I had the pleasure of coming to the rollout of this year's indicators at the White House this year. It's really an impressive study. The Science Board uses that information and others to advise the president and Congress on science and technology policy, research, education, economic growth, really across the board of important indicators for the way that the enterprise is moving. Can we measure the impact of STEM education and workforce development initiatives on U.S. global competitiveness?
Yeah, I mean, to touch on that point, Keith. So the indicators is a policy neutral and a gold standard of giving us evidence base of where we are, right? Across a whole variety of factors. And what I can tell you unequivocally is that we know that at present, almost close to 30% of the workforce in the United States depends now in STEM, broadly, interpreted. And we also know that the participants of that do not reflect the demographic reality of our nation, right? So we've been talking about it in this panel that, for example, you take Hispanics and, they are about 70% of the workforce of the United States. I think in STEM fields, they represent about 7% around that. So there is a huge gap that we have in addressing what Dr. Panchanathan said of the missing millions, right? And as a board, a National Science Board, we had the objective of, could we get in 2030 closer to representation? And I can tell you honestly, is that we're going to miss that objective as a nation. So one clear thing from the indicators is that it's never been more important or valuable to participate in STEM around that in terms of deriving economic rewards and opportunity for people and for our citizens. But we have ways to go, to put it mildly. So what do we need to do? So there's an urgency. And Dr. Cortez was talking about, for example, the support of grad students and how we fund them and pay them. So we've had, working with the director in the National Science Foundation, progressively rising the graduate fellowship stipends that we pay all the way to $40,000 a year. But in general, we don't do enough. So this is why the most important thing that I think from a policy perspective that we could do as a nation is to advocate for an NDA 2.0. I alluded to this National Defense Education Act 1.0 that had a transformative effect. That was post-Sputnik, and that is what really mobilized and inspired countless millions, gave access to education to those that didn't have it, supported community college, supported curriculum development and professional development for teachers in high school. Many things were done. We need the new version of that for now. And that will address, issues like wages that we're talking about in terms of how we support students that go through graduate school, but beyond that. So what I would sort of ask for everybody is, we have initial sort of ideas and templates, but we need a real movement. Just like there was a movement of chips and science on getting action done on this issue of talent and human capital and investing in ourselves, right, as a nation on this topic broadly and systematically through K through 12, community colleges, and higher ed. We need action, and we need that umbrella, something clean, just like we had endless frontiers that ended up on chips. We need that moment of clarity because it is undoubtedly the case that we're facing a crisis. We're not representing, who should be participating. We have systemic shortages in critical technology fields and health fields. And there's inequities that we have to address around all of this. And I'll finally just make one final point. Keith, you asked me about cross sectors before, and just a policy point of view on hiring. So IBM led an effort, and there were others involved, of moving from skill-based hiring versus, degree-based hiring for many areas. And this may seem like a subtle point, but it's actually very important. Very often we were excluding, let's say you wanted to bring cybersecurity experts. We were excluding people for having high quality jobs because we asked them for credentials that were not needed to perform the job. You say you got to have a college degree or you got to have so on, as opposed to saying, what is the skill that I'm hiring for? And can you demonstrate this skill? And actually that movement is having a big impact in broader participation of who gets to benefit from these jobs. So sometimes it's also the combination of certain reforms of what is really needed to do the job, and how do we actually lower the barriers to demonstrate that you can do this or support you in the training to achieve that objective.
Terrific. Well, this is great. It's really a fantastic set of comments. Unfortunately, we are out of time for today. But I think that we've gotten some really good guidance and really thought-provoking comments for thinking about how to move forward and move past some of the barriers that our discipline is experiencing, and enabling a workforce that can take on the challenges that are coming at us and take on the opportunities that are there for scientists and engineers to try to move forward and help to advance our society, increase the health of our populace. So let me just thank the panelists for their thoughtful, expert contributions to this discussion, and thank all of you as well in the audience for joining us. We're looking forward to our next session featuring Dawn O'Connell, Assistant Secretary for Preparedness, and response in the Department of Health and Human Services, who will be joining us in just a few moments for a keynote presentation. The members of the audience can access Dr. Cohen's presentation in the lobby of the Zoom events platform. So for now, thank you for being with us and for this stimulating conversation, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the meeting. Thank you.